Today we're going to move on to our next session. It's titled Historical Fiction, Capturing the Atmosphere. It's Kenize Mourad in conversation with Bina Shah. So over to you.
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you here. This panel was originally meant to be held at 4:45, and it was unexpectedly changed to 7:15. But it was nice of you all to adapt to that change and come up here to listen to a very special conversation with a very special person. You all know who I am. I'm Bina. The person that I want to introduce to you is somebody that some of you may already know, and some of you may be new to her and her life and her work. This is Kenize Mourad. Kenize Mourad is a French-Turkish journalist. She's a novelist, a historian, and a foreign affairs and war correspondent. She was born in Paris in 1939, and she worked as a reporter and war correspondent for Le Nouvel Observateur in the Middle East until 1983. And her specialty was the Middle East and the subcontinent. So she spent a lot of time in this part of the world. After being a journalist for 15 years, she made a switch and started to write novels, and was a hit from the very first. The novel that she wrote, which captured the imagination of the world, was De la part de la princesse morte, which translates in English to Regards from the Dead Princess. A little awkward, not as pretty as the French, but it has to do. This novel was based on the life of her mother, Selma, an Ottoman princess and the granddaughter of the last Sultan of Turkey. This novel sold over 4 million copies worldwide, and it's been translated into 34 languages. She won numerous literary awards for her work, including a very important award from the prestigious French Academy of Arts and Letters. She followed up Regards from the Dead Princess with another book about her own life, Le Jardin de Badalpour, The Garden of Badalpour. It's the sequel to the first volume, but it's also a great standalone in its own right. And she's also written a novel called In the City of Gold and Silver, and a nonfiction book, which is more of a reportage, but nonfiction reportage, Our Sacred Land, Voices of the Palestine-Israeli Conflict. For her work and for her services to literature, she was given the award of Officer of the Order of Arts and Letters by the French government. In all of her books, she says that she wants to make the West better understand the East. And she says that for her, the job of a journalist is to give voice to the voiceless. And she chose to always be on the side of the downtrodden, not the powerful. Kenize Mourad has family on both sides of the border, and she visits Pakistan every year. She has also written a novel about Pakistan called Au Pays du Pur, In the Land of the Pure. It's a geopolitical thriller set in Pakistan. We'll talk about it in a little while. Kenize Mourad lives in Istanbul today, and I would like you to join me in giving her a very warm welcome.
Thank you.
It's working. It's working. You have to have a loud voice like me, though. I'm going to start with a conversation that we had yesterday at lunch with the Consul General of France, Mr. Alexis Chatatinsky, who is in the audience. He asked you, why did you move from journalism to writing fiction, to novels?
Well, I must say I love being a journalist. It's really very interesting to be on the spot of all the big events. But I began to want to write novels or write books after I was covering the Iranian Revolution. I was there for 6 months during all these very fascinating events. And I found that I could not really give justice to the events, because in a newspaper or in a magazine, where I was writing for a political magazine, you have mostly maybe 2 pages, and also it's a short time. So I wanted, and in these 2 pages you cannot go deep enough, you can explain things only rather superficially. You cannot go back to the history of the country, to the culture, to the religion, of course. In Iranian Revolution, that was the main thing, but anyway, it was too superficial. And at that time, I felt I wanted to write a novel, or at least document novel, as I always do, about the Iranian Revolution. I began that, and I never wrote it. I never wrote it because in the meantime, something very strong was demanding that I should write. It was the story of my mother. My mother, which I've never known because she died when I was 1 year old in Paris, but she died, she was 26 years old. And then I knew very little about her, and I needed to understand who she was, because there was very different talk about her. Some people were telling she was very intelligent, others were telling she was like a little bird, superficial, loving, dresses and all that. I think, in fact, she was very intelligent, and she was very, she did live, the freedom for her was the main thing. She was one of these very independent women of that time. So to write this story, I began late to write books. I was about 38, 40. And to write the story of my mother, I did have to go through each of her steps. So she lived, and she lived in her childhood in a palace in Istanbul. Then there was Mustafa Kemal came. The family was exiled. They were exiled with my grandmother. They were exiled in Lebanon without any money, after all the riches of the Ottoman court. And in Lebanon, she was to be married. As she had no money, she had to be married to a man with a rich man. And of course, she was Muslim to a Muslim. And she was a princess, so she was to be married to a prince. Mm-hmm. So it was an arranged marriage done by Maulana Shaukat Ali, a very well-known person in the subcontinent. And she met my father. They never met before marriage. My father was a very good-looking man. He had been brought up in England, in Edinburgh, and he was very progressive. But living in Lucknow, which is the most traditional town in India, he wanted my mother to conform to all the uses and to the purdah. And my mother in Beirut, which was at the time the little Paris of the West, arriving in Lucknow to be in purdah was a terrible shock for her. Then it did not go very well. Anyway, she stayed there. When she expected me, she wanted to have me in Paris. So my father sent her with an old faithful servant, a eunuch. How do you say eunuch?
Yes, eunuch is fine.
Eunuch, okay. To Paris, and he was to join her at the time of my birth. But then the war, Second World War, broke up, and France was under the German, Nazi, and India was British. So there was no way, no communication. So he could not join her, and finally, after 1 year, I was 1 year old, she died in misery because she could not receive any money from India. She died, she sold out jewels, she sold everything she could, and she died in misery in Paris at the age of 26. So to reconstruct this story was quite, for me, of course, very important, but I was interested is to give the atmosphere of all these 4 countries at the time. Because it's not only the story of my mother, it's a reconstruction of a whole period, which is between the two wars. and a period which was very essential to the understanding of our time, or the time after. So I read all the books I could, but the most important thing I found, apart from the interviews I made of many, many people, was to read. I read, I think, thousands of newspapers. Being a journalist, I could read very quickly the newspaper, and I could find in the newspaper the little detail of everyday life that you don't find, which are very important for a novel, the characters, and which was giving you the atmosphere of the time, as well as during the Ottoman Empire in the court. For that, of course, I interview some of old aunts of mine, old sultans who had been living in the court. And then after that, the newspaper were really very important. And of course, interviews, all sorts of interviews. To tell you how I try to be true to history and to the reality. My mother, at that time, there was no plane when my mother came to India. She came to India there were very few planes. It was in 1937. And then she came by boat from Beirut to Bombay. So what I did, and then from Bombay, she took the train to go to Lucknow, which was something like 40 hours travel. And I did that, I did the same. To put myself, I did not take the plane, I wanted to put myself in the shoes of my mother. And I took the train, and to leave this travel, which was at that time something like 24 hours, and to relieve her anxiety and all what she could think at the time. So, in my historical novels, this is biographical but also historical, as I said, describe a lot the countries where she lived at the time. I have always been very careful, because I've been also a journalist, to be very exact. Everything is absolutely exact in what I describe. The only liberty I took was with the psychology of my mother. Of course, I did not know what she could think at that time, but knowing about her character, having been told about which sort of person she was, I did imagine what she could think at this time or that time. So to me, this book, which is like a novel, could be a biography also. It's very, very true to the reality.
That's quite a story.
And the other book, Hazrat Mahal, of course, is much more of,
Yes.
a historical novel. The book which you told in the Town of Gold and Silver is a story of Begum Hazrat Mahal. Begum Hazrat Mahal of Lucknow, who led the first war of independence against the British in 1857. And she's a very well-known person. But no book had been written about her. And only small pamphlets, no book. So she's from Lucknow, like my father. And I went to see all the old family of Lucknow who had been fighting along with the Begum. I mean, whose ancestor had been fighting along with the Begum. And they had old documents, and they told me all the souvenirs, all the stories they were told by their forefathers. And I did as exactly as I could, of course, with all the documents I could find about the war, etc. I wrote her story. I took one liberty. She had a faithful general, and I imagine that there may have been some love between them. That's the only liberty I took. When I was in Lucknow, one person was very cross about it, but all the others were applauding and saying, yes, no, it's okay, it's good.
You're allowed a little artistic license.
That was,
of
course.
That's the fun of novel and
Yes.
fiction writing as
Yes.
opposed to reporting journalism,
Yes,
where you have
yes.
to be completely exact.
Exactly. And also the style, The first time I was beginning my book, I went to see a friend writer in a publishing house, and I showed my first chapter. He says, "Oh my God, how awful. You write like Le Monde." Le Monde is a well-known French paper, and I thought that was wonderful to write like this wonderful French paper. He explained me, no, you cannot write like a journalist. You must put feelings, blood, and flesh in all what you write. It's very, very different.
I can totally relate to that because I had the same experience of writing a lot of journalism and then also at the same time writing fiction. And my editor would always say, this part is too journalistic. You have to change it. You have to make it more novelistic. But you make me think of something that yesterday Salma Dabar, the British Palestinian writer who gave the keynote speech at the opening ceremony, she said that there were 3 principles very important to a writer: authenticity, justice, and beauty. And I'm wondering if your way of writing this novel about your mother was a search for justice in a way, perhaps. To do justice to somebody who you felt had not been
yes, of course, certainly.
acknowledged.
Certainly, but all my novels are trying to do justice to some part of society or to some...
Yes, yeah.
I always write about... I always give voice to the, as I say, to the voiceless, to the... I did this as a journalist, but also in my novels. And you know, in fact, you were asking me why I became a journalist. I became a journalist. I did not want to write about France or Europe. I was not at all interested. I wanted to write about my original countries, meaning Middle East and the Indian subcontinent, because I could find that the Westerners did not understand a thing about it. And I was all the time hurt by the misconception, prejudice that I was finding at every step when I was in France or in any European country. So for that, I wanted to write to explain to the West, to the Westerner, the East that I knew, which was so diverse and rich and complex, and
Beautiful.
not at all the kind of thing, you know, black and white that is seen usually I say, of course.
So besides the fact that you were actually writing into reality a missing part of your own life, do you think that you may have gone through this experience of retracing your mother's steps and the travel? Was it a psychological process for you?
Of course, yes.
Please, can you tell
It
us a
was.
little bit about your feelings and emotions when you were going through this?
Well, now I'm going to say something quite personal. When I was 15, I was told something about my mother that I really did not like. You know, as an adolescent, 15 adolescent, you are very strict of every principle. So I did not like, and I began not to like my mother anymore. When I was a child, I adored her as an image. The nuns, Catholic nuns, were telling your mother was like Virgin Mary, you know, this sort of thing. Yeah. So, but then, so I changed, and I really did not like her. I could not understand her. But then, you know, when you grow older, it's very bad to have a sort of grudge against your mother because it affects yourself deeply. And then I began to understand better. I began to understand better, and I wanted to really to understand fully. And it's how I made the travel of this book, which was a book to understand her through her life, from the little girl who had everything, and we became a woman who lost everything. And who tried to do, she did mistakes, but she tried to do all what she could to overcome the difficulty of her life, you know.
So in finding your mother in these pages, by writing these pages, it sounds like you found something about yourself as well. Yeah.
In every book, one finds things about oneself.
Yes.
In every book.
And so the second book that came after this, The Gardens of Badlpur, which was about your journey, where you went to see your father and your father's family.
I have to say something interesting also today.
Yes, please do.
Most interesting today, in fact. I was put, when I was a little girl, and my mother died, in a nun school, schools of nuns,
Convent.
Catholic school. And when after the war, my father asked for me, he was in India, he sent 2 women to fetch me. He could not, he was at the time fighting alongside with Nehru for the independence of India. So he sent 2 women, and the nuns hid me
They hid you.
Hid me. They sent me to the countryside because they did not want to give this nice little girl to an awful father. Awful because he was Muslim, of course. So I was hidden from my father. And, you know, they thought he's going to marry her when she'll be 10 years old. My father is a very progressive man. He is not at all this kind anyway. So they hid me, and my father could not get me back, and I could not go to India before I was major. How do you say major?
You became an adult.
21 years old. At that time it was not 18, it was 21 years old when you are free to do what you want. So I went there when I was 21 years old, and I met my father, I was 21 years old. So you see, my life has been changed totally because of prejudice against Islam. Mm-hmm. Maybe I had a better life, I would not say. Maybe it was more interesting. I have a difficult but very interesting life. I had been in Lucknow, I would have been in Purda, maybe, and maybe married, certainly married young. And anyway, it could have been, it's another sort of life. I don't know. I think my life has been very interesting, but it was not decided by me. It was decided by prejudice. So in all my articles, my thing has been really to fight prejudices. And it's important.
Well, that takes me to my next question, which is about the novel that you wrote about Pakistan, Au Pays du Pur, In the Land of the Pure. And it sounds like you wanted to correct the conception of Pakistan also, a very prejudiced view. And I'll quote from a review of this book where they said that you are looking at misunderstood, complex Pakistan, where feudalism and obscurantism mix with sophistication and modernity. So is Au Pays du Pur autobiographical? Is Anna, the young journalist who comes to Pakistan, is she young Kenize?
More or less, yes, more or less. Of course, I took the experience of
It's an easy question to answer.
I took a journalist because it was easy that a journalist, she goes all over, so she sees all the aspects of Pakistan. So it's how I could describe different aspects of Pakistan, because this journalist goes all over. Of course, I had to add some adventure in a novel. She's kidnapped by a group of Taliban, blah blah blah, and there is a love story with etc. It's really quite a interesting story. It's as you say, what you called it. Anyway, so but as a journalist, she could see everything, and it's so interesting. Pakistan, it's true. There is everything in Pakistan, everything from the most modern to the most traditional and obscurantist. And, but you know, in the West, they only think of a country with, in the West, the people who have not traveled, etc., they think of Pakistan as a country of nasty bearded men and old women, veiled women in Purda. This is all what they know. When I say I go to Pakistan, they say, oh my God, it's dangerous. Why do you go there? I said, this is ridiculous. It's a lovely country. So I wanted to give another aspect of Pakistan, and I think I gave it in this book, which is going, by the way, which is going to be released in English. Could not be for today, but it will be next week. Maybe you can find it. It's called In the Land of the Pure.
I am definitely going to look it up and read it and let you know.
Yeah.
So when you visited Pakistan as a journalist, all the things that interested you to write about this region must have been the complexity, the contradictions, the clash really between so many forces and so many, I don't even know what to call it, but just the general chaos of Pakistan. Were you able to make sense of this country?
Sorry.
Could you make any sense of this country?
Yes, well, yes, of course. Because I was with my family, a Pakistani family, and they were, I was seeing it with them through their eyes, explaining me a few things I could not understand. So, no, I had a lot of empathy for the place, And it was also, I was with some friends. One of my best friends was a trade union leader. So I went in factories. I was even arrested at the time, under Bhutto. I was arrested because I went in a factory to interview the workers. We were on strike, and then I was arrested, not for a long time. So I saw all sorts of different aspects of Pakistan, and it was most interesting.
What do you think of the future for the women of Pakistan? How do you see the women of Pakistan, and do you think that there's an equal possibility for them?
You know, Pakistan makes me think sometimes of Turkey. There are two societies, very, very divided. I mean, we are very far from each other. In Pakistan, as I said, there is the most modern society and there is the most traditional also. In Turkey, you have also a very westernized society, which would be more important than in Pakistan. It would be 40%. And the rest is a very traditional Middle Eastern society, and they don't talk to each other. They ignore each other. And this is a real problem, at least in Turkey.
I did see that in Turkey because I traveled, I saw Istanbul, which is the most modern of the modern. Then I went to central Turkey, to Konya, where the shrine of Rumi is, and we traveled around there. So traditional. I was surprised, but then I realized, oh, this is still quite an important. This is real Turkey. This is the majority. What they show in the European side of Istanbul and all the modern, the beaches, this and that. That's the majority. Yeah. So there's a lot underneath the surface that we're told. Let's talk about the Palestinian book. Let's get right to it. So you have written about so many of the conflicts that have gripped this part of the world. You wrote about the 1971 war, the liberation of Bangladesh, the Lebanese civil war, the Iranian revolution, and all of these are still unresolved conflicts today. But the conflict that you wrote about, which is probably the biggest and the hottest and the most difficult to resolve, is the Palestine-Israel conflict. And I would actually like to read a little bit from the introduction of your book. This is Our Sacred Land, Voices of the Palestine-Israeli Conflict. And I have not read all of it, but what I started to read, I was fascinated. I couldn't put it down. I just wanted to keep reading and reading and reading and reading. Although I have been a journalist specializing in the Middle East, particularly the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, for over 15 years, I decided long ago not to write a book on the subject. It is almost impossible to deal with an issue on which passions run so high without accusations of anti-Semitism from some quarters and anti-Arab racism from others. Recent events in the region demand that this silence be broken. Great human tragedies concern everyone. This is also a struggle for justice and for rights. The right of the Israelis to live in peace and the right of the Palestinian people not only to exist, but also to live in their country at a time when Israeli leaders talk of forced exile. We are on the brink of a wave of unprecedented terrorism that no one and nothing will be able to stop unless we act now. Whatever we are told, terrorism will never be contained by police or military action. The only solution is to address its causes. You wrote this book in 2004. We are 20 years on, and it's still as true what you have written today as it was then.
The situation is, as we know, absolutely horrendous, beyond imagination. It's the first time in history that we see every day massacres on our television and that nothing is done. Because when you talk about the Jewish Holocaust, we did not know. I mean, some people knew, but at least most people did not see the image. What is awful and which is really hurting all of us, I think hurting our souls deeply, is to be confronted to this horror and not to be able to do anything, because our governments could very well do something, I mean, the Western government certainly, they just make economic sanction to Israel and Israel would stop or not send weapons. Anyway, we all know that. But I think, never anymore the West will be able to give us lessons. I think it's finished. No more. I mean, it's so awful. Anyway, so this book is still, I wrote about the fate of the Palestinians, more than their difficulties, that the soldiers, even at that time, when the children were throwing stones, the soldiers were shooting on the children. And one prime minister, I think it was Sharon, said, we'll make of the Palestinian a people of crippled. So, I mean, the problem that the Muslims have not been able to unite. The Zionists are very, very strong. And now in France or in other countries, I mean, they completely control, or nearly completely, control the medias, university, meaning controlling the mind of the people. So even if there are a lot of people all over England, France, Spain, etc., Italy, who are protesting a lot, but I mean, it's still a minority of people. If we had in France or in England 10 million people demonstrating, the government would have to do something. We have now 10,000, so government doesn't mind. In the same time, of course, the only thing we can do is to try to send the news of all these horrors all over the world, which I do every day. And so again, to go back to this book, which I hope is going to be republished, because it is in French, but in English, the English publisher refused to republish it because pressure on him, of course. So maybe we'll try to do something about it. But you have the everyday life. I did not want to do anything political. It's the everyday life of men, women, children in Palestine, and also in Israel, parties in Israel. And I even refused to interview Arafat at that time, because politicians are just talking, it's not interesting, they never say the truth. So I stayed with the people, not as a journalist who goes out for 1 hour, interview somebody. I stayed sometimes 48 hours with the people, so that they get confident, and so that tell what they really think and really feel. And it is, what is written in this book, it's exactly, I could have written it yesterday, before the 7th of October, I mean. After 7th of October was something else. But I could have, so it's a situation, and one understands when you read this book, you understand that, of course, why it was normal that the 7th of October happened, because these people have been tortured and persecuted so much since 70 years or something like that, 75 years, that, I mean, of course it has to blow up. And that's all.
It's a horror story, really. But I want to read a little more from the book, just to give the audience a sense of how beautiful the writing is. Because you have a talent I've seen. You're a very rare kind of writer that can exist in different times at the same time. So you are able to take your reader back to Ottoman Turkey. You're able to take your reader back to India when the Nawabs and the Rajas were ruling. You're able to take your reader backwards, forwards. You have a way of seeing the world in all its possibilities. And there's great beauty in all of that, even in the middle of terror and horror. So I'm just going to read two paragraphs from the first chapter of this book, A House Destroyed 3 Times. And just to enjoy the beauty of the language. It's an English translation. It's
for once it's well made.
For once it's well
most
done.
Of my English translations are not well done, but this one is good.
I arrived in Jerusalem one evening in May 2002. From the balcony of my room, I had a view of the old city, bathed in golden twilight. Behind the high crenellated walls, dating from the Ottoman period, I could glimpse the roofs of churches and large mosques, next to which fluttered the blue and white Israeli flag, stamped with the Star of David. In the flaming sky, great flocks of skylarks darted and weaved in the dying light, while the muezzin's call to prayer reverberated in the distance. Then everything fell silent, and as the heady scent of jasmine began drifting across from the surrounding greenery, I felt cradled in the atmosphere of serenity and began idly to dream of the eternal Jerusalem, the city of peace, forgetting for a moment the fratricidal war that has raged here for centuries. And we have Dr. Iftikhar Salahuddin in the audience, who is well known for his photography and the beautiful book that he has created about Jerusalem, the full title of which is Jerusalem, A Journey Back in Time. So I feel like Jerusalem is one of these cities, again, where there's a time warp. I'm so sorry that I may never get to see it in my life because of the diplomatic, but you have been. You've been there twice, and so do you think that this captures what you saw? Very eloquently. How do you come to arrive at painting such a portrait with your words? How do you do it? You have to tell us. We're all waiting. You don't know.
When I write, I have to go like in a monastery. I retire from life, and I don't see anybody. I am alone in the countryside, usually. Always in the countryside, because in a town there is too much excitement and noise. So I go in the countryside, and I put my life between parentheses for 2 or 3 years. So it's quite hard. But of course, I take some holiday sometimes. I go back to life. But I need to put myself in the atmosphere of the time when it is a historical novel. And when it is, this is different, of course, it was. So I put myself in the atmosphere. I put myself in the personality or soul of my hero, of my main personage.
Yep, character, the main character.
And so it's a work. It's a little. I could not write if I was living everyday life. I have to put myself totally into like a globe, which I'm doing, and stay there, and so that's why between each book I take a long holiday. I take a long holiday to live my life.
It's interesting, though, that in your childhood, you actually lived in an environment that was like that. You were in a convent. It was removed from reality, and they sent you to the countryside when your father was looking for you. Do you think there's a little bit of resonance?
I love nature. I think without nature and music, I would die, and many people would die, because we need, nature, resourcing oneself, and music, of course, is a great.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. I need music, I need art, I need beauty to offset a lot of the ugly things that we have to confront and bear witness to as writers, as journalists, as artists. But let me ask you a more practical question, which is that what would be your advice to people who want to advocate and militate for the oppressed in Palestine, in Gaza? How can they do that in a way that is useful and supportive to the Palestinian cause?
The only thing now is really to disseminate information as much as one can, and also when there are demonstrations, to go there. It's what I said. We can't do much more because our governments, all governments, Arab governments do nothing also. So Turkish government is talking high but does nothing. So governments do nothing. I don't know, there is a fright. People are so frightened of Israel. So frightened, not of Israel so much, as a Jewish lobby all over the world. which is so powerful. As everybody knows, no politician can have a career without, if he has criticized Israel. Impossible. By the way, after I wrote this book on Palestine, before I had all the television and everything for my books, since then I am totally boycotted in France. Totally boycotted. Not one television, not one article in a big paper, only in small papers. My publisher for the last book on Pakistan called 2 journalists that she knew, and the journalist said, "We don't open the books of Kenize Mourad." Such is the power of the Jewish lobby in France. And not only in France, but France is very strong.
So when there is a call to give a voice to both sides of the conflict, we hear this all the time. What about the humanity of the victims of October 7th and so on and so forth? How do we do that while remaining true to the principles that we feel that the liberation of Palestine, the occupation must end? How do we maintain the balance?
But one has just to take an historical point of view. You cannot begin on the 7th of October. You have to begin in 1948, when 850,000 Palestinians were thrown out from their homes, many killed by terrorists. I mean, at that time, the Jewish group were really terrorist group. They were. So, and then, since, again, now 75 years, people have been persecuted in such a way. I mean, so, it's normal. I'm even surprised. I mean, there were a few revolts. There was the Intifada in the years 90, 80, 90, etc. But since 67, since the occupied territories, since Israel took the territories where the Palestinians were living, United Nations gave at least 50 resolutions. And Israel did not obey to any of them, of course also because the United States did not veto them. But Israel is the only country in the world who can do anything, and nothing happens. It's the only country in the world. Look at Russia is being punished, Iran is being punished, sanctions here, sanctions there. Israel, no sanction at all. And the worst, that they say we are the victims. This is, the terrorists telling that they are the victims. This is a little much. So, people are talking of Hamas. They say, oh, Hamas is a terror group. Hamas, we should not forget, has been elected by the Palestinians, has been elected as a government by the Palestinians in Gaza 25 years ago, something like that. And what did Hamas now? Maybe not very nice, but in the same time, they are a resistance group. And you can say that Israel is acting as a really terrorist. You can call Israel a terrorist country these days. What they do is not seen anywhere else. It has never been seen like that. I mean, never. Now what is going to happen these days? Where are these 1 million people going to go? I mean, now Israel is bombing Rafah, the last bit. So what is, telling that they want to kill Hamas is ridiculous. You cannot kill few people in the middle of 1.5 million people. And they use, if they wanted to kill only Hamas, they would use bombs of 20 tons, small bombs. No, they use 2,000 tons, which are given by the Americans. And 2,000 tons, you kill 100 people each time. So, the lies and the hypocrisy, I'm sorry to say, but I am not sorry, hypocrisy of the state of Israel. And what is very sad is to see that they hide the truth to their citizens. Israelis are not shown all these terrible things. They are shown very little. So they support their government. And they dance of joy when they see, what's happening in Gaza. Because they don't really see everything. They just see a small bit. So,
this makes perfect sense to people who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, but if you talk like this in other quarters, especially in the United States or UK,
nowhere.
They have the complete. It's like a negative of a photograph. It's almost like they have the complete opposite.
Yes, I know.
It's difficult to deal with. We won't solve this tonight, and neither will we solve this sitting here and talking. Yes, I'm going to actually open this up to the floor. If there are any questions for Madame Mourad, we would love to hear them. Don't be shy. Miriam Santana. Yes. Wait for the microphone, Miriam. That way you'll be recorded as well.
Yes, thank you for a lovely talk. And the divide you speak about in the Turkish and in the Pakistani societies, that divide between the modern and the traditional, how do you think that can be bridged?
J'ai pas très bien compris.
Est-ce que c'est possible de croiser c'est la division entre les classes au Pakistan et en Turc? Est-ce que c'est possible de...
Entre la modernité...
Oh, elle parle français, voilà.
Entre la modernité et les gens qui sont plus traditionnels. Comment est-ce qu'on peut rapprocher ça?
By education, of course. Education, and I think education in Pakistan and in Turkey for the highest strata is very good, but otherwise for the middle class or lower strata is not good at all. And we know here about the ghost schools and all sorts of other things. And in Turkey, the education in the government school are not very good. So if the education makes two sorts of very different people, the gap will not be filled.
Thank you.
It's almost in Pakistan as if we're cheating our own people by not putting in the resources into education that we need to. Is it the same in Turkey?
Not so bad.
Not that bad.
Not so bad, but not good enough. Okay. Far from it.
All right. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, there's a question over there. The gentleman in the purple shirt. Please speak really clearly into the microphone. It's a little hard to hear.
Namely, Shakil Shahzad, as a respected speaker, my question is concerning about, because you are a historical fiction writer, author of many books. My question is about what are you doing or keen look into the future of the Gaza Strip, Palestine or Israel conflict, as well as Donald Trump is to resolve the two-nation, two-country solution, permanent solution of that. What are your opinion or in future look into this regard?
Thank you. Yes, the question is, what do you predict is going to happen in Gaza, especially given the fact that Donald Trump has, I don't know what his importance is really, but proposed the end of the two-state solution. They want, the talk is that there cannot be a two-state solution. So what do you think that means for the future?
That means that, of course, they are trying to ensure that Israel is wanting to take the whole of what is left of Palestine. That's very clear. They are doing it in Gaza now. They are also doing, in the West Bank, in the other part of Palestine. They are putting in jail thousands of people. They are killing. They have begun also to do not the same, but they are going to try to destroy also West Bank, meaning Cisjordania. So this thing will give, the consequences is going to be a huge wave of terrorism. Which I understand. How are the young Palestinians going to accept that all their family has been killed, and etc., and all the horrors which are happening? So the young people, as they told me in the book, when I was asking children whose parents have been killed, I said, what do you want to do when you be older? He said, I want to become a fighter, to take revenge on the death of my father, So all these young people, most of them, they are going to want to take revenge. And the West has to get ready to a huge wave of terrorism all over. And I suppose one day, I'm sure one day Palestinians will get their own country, because maybe the West will understand that for their own security and for their own well-being, they have to give a country to Palestine. I think so. They will have, for their own interest, not for Palestinians. They don't give a damn about Palestinians.
Thank you for that question. And now you, sir?
May I stand up? Okay.
Yes, please.
Madam, my name is Shahid Ali Qureshi and I'm a lawyer. Of course, Hamas had the mandate in Gaza and it has the mandate. It is representative of the Gazan people. I have a very simple question. Do you think Hamas used its mandate correctly on October the 7th? Yes or no, please?
No, they did not use their mandate correctly. You
Thank
are right.
I was expecting.
You are right. They did not. But, I mean, they did not, of course. But this does not justify what is done by Israel. No, I agree. No, they were not. And also, it was not so easy because, you know, they are being, their ties, I mean, Israeli are also working their way to prevent the Palestinians to have a normal life. For instance, Israel is very often keeping the money which is due to the Palestinians and which is necessary for paying the government fees, the fees of the functionaire, of the clerks. So for months, Israel is keeping the thing. Finally, he has to release it. But they try to make life very, very difficult for the government.
One follow-up question. One simple question. What would have been a proportionate response by Israel on October the 7th?
Sorry?
What would have been a
Proportionate response by Israel on October the 7th?
La propre réponse d'Israël.
Acceptable response by Israel on October the
To the
7th?
7th of October.
Acceptable response, proportionate response. Thank you.
Maybe the same number of deaths, maybe. Maybe the same number of deaths. But in the same time, yes, let us say maybe that. But in the same time, one has to consider what Israel has been doing to the Palestinians in 75 years. I'm sorry, you cannot negate that.
I'm not sure that we can quantify a response with
No, of
bodies.
course I say that like that, but you know.
But I do commend you for asking a question without a 10-minute speech before the question came, so thank you for that. Dr. Nassim, we've got a question over here. Dr. Nassim Salahuddin.
Thank you, Bina. I understand the reaction of the West in the Israeli-Palestine conflict, but what do you think is the response or the reaction of the Islamic countries, especially of Saudi Arabia? You don't understand
It's
that.
a disaster, it's a shame, total shame, because the Arab countries have never done anything. You know, also they are frightened because Palestinians are supposed to be progressive people. They are the most educated people of all the Arab world, Palestinian, very educated. Most of them are very progressive, and all this Arab little kingdom, they don't want progressive people. They are frightened. They don't like Palestinians. This is one of the reasons also.
One last question from the gentleman in the black shirt.
Well, I am Sahib Khan Cooker. I just want to ask to write about the warlike situations is always to present the factual situation before the reader. So how do you find it to make it a fictitious account of it? What would be your experience regarding this? How can anybody present it as a fictitious account of it?
Fictitious. How do you turn fact into fiction? How do you protect
In general?
people's, yes, in general.
No, because about Palestinians, there was no fiction at all. Okay. No, I tell you, all the historical facts I respect, I don't change at all. The part of the fiction is the people in my book, the personage. In my book, I can invent a personage to show something I want to show. And I put myself in the head of some personage of my book, but all what is historical and all the descriptions of the society. All this is absolutely true, absolutely exact. I am not taking any liberty with that. I take liberty only with the people I invent, or I took liberty with my mother because she was my mother, so I felt I could try to make her live as she didn't live.
This is the magic of the author, the writer, that can take fact, turn it into fiction, but still keep it authentic. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do
The
as a writer.
facts are not put into fiction. I put fiction among in a historical surrounding, historical situation. But I never change historical fact into fiction.
Yeah, no good writer can be dishonest, cannot.
No, you are right.
Must deal in the truth. Well, with that, we've come to the end of our hour with Kenize Mourad. It's been a real pleasure. It's been an honor for me to speak with you. Thank you for taking your time.
Thank you for your very nice presentation and questions.
We hope to see you again, inshallah, soon in the future. A big hand, please, for Madame Kenize Mourad. Thank you, everybody. Good night.